Welcome back to the Engineered Angler, and no theory this time. We're actually gonna make a lure. Now, I had been planning to go ahead and make a classic stick bait, a crankbait that everybody's seen. They've been around since the 60s. But someone sent me a 7-inch crankbait, and you might recognize this. It's a Bagley Bangalore. It's a 7-inch, really narrow, floating stick bait. I think because it's so long and narrow, it actually gives it an interesting movement and silhouette in the water. So I can see why people like these lures. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of dissection. You might have noticed that there's 2 belly hook eyes and a tail hook eye, so it's a triple treble hook lure, and I've gone ahead and taken those things off. Because what I want to do is not so much literally dissect it. I don't want to damage the lure. What I want to do is get the weight and start really understanding what the dimensions are and how this thing was built. Okay, first let's get the easy stuff. Let's see what it weighs. 22.95 grams. Okay, next I want to see how wide it is at its widest point. 17.69. And I'm going to get the highest point, 21.80. And now I want to get the distance to that wide point. This doesn't have to be super exact, but we'll call it 58 millimeters. So right about now, most of you are wondering why I'm copying someone else's lure. And that's a doggone good question. But I'm using this as an exercise in how you evaluate a lure that you already have, or a lure you yourself made and want to repeat, so that you can get the same action on the same exact kind of lure. So the next little bit of analysis I want to do on this lure is to find what the volume is. And that's a handy piece of information, both if you're going to make a mold directly from an existing lure, you really want to know what the volume is. And for me, since I'm making one by hand, it'll help me see how close I can get to the original one as far as volume. So let me show you how I actually do that. So usually what I'll do is I'll take this little apparatus, which is really nothing but a block of wood with a piece of PVC on it and a little bit of a tube sticking out. And essentially what it does is it allows me to measure displacement. I'll fill it with water and I'll let it run out of this little tube, and this way once it's all run out, it's at the level of that tube. And then I'll plunge the lure down into the water, allowing the water to spill out of this little tube, and the amount of water that spills out is equal to the volume of the actual lure. So I need to do that with this big guy, but this thing is way too small for it, so it's time to add a mega lure size volume tube. So I'm going to use this, and I've already drilled a hole for the drain tube on it. Alright, so now I just need to add my little drain tube, and I'm just going to stick this in there just about 1/4 of an inch because I don't want it to be in the way of the lure. Alright, let's let it cool down and I'll see if it leaks. If it doesn't, we'll go right to measuring this volume. Alright, it doesn't look like it's going to leak. I'm going to add a little more water to it to top it off, and I've added a little bit of soap to this. The soap helps to break the surface tension of the water and allows it to flow faster and easier. This way you get a more accurate results. And so I'll just top it off. All I need to do is plunge the lure in, make sure the cup doesn't fall. And I'll wait till it stops dripping. It takes a minute. Alright, now since the scale is zeroed with the cup on it, I can measure this cup and all I'll get is the weight of the water. And it's 34.47, and I'll go ahead and run this same experiment like 3 times and I'll average them. That should give me a pretty close approximation. Alright, so I did it 4 times and the average is 34.95. And that means that the volume of that lure is 34.95 milliliters, because 1 gram equals 1 milliliter when you're working with water. And I'm going to take about 1 milliliter off for the bib. That's just a guesstimation, so I'll probably just call it 34 milliliters as the actual volume. To make the lure, I'm going to use balsa, but this is the only balsa I have. It's 36 inches long, 3 inches wide, and only an 1/8 inch thick. So I'm gonna have to do a lamination. I'm gonna laminate a bunch of pieces to make a thick enough and long enough block to carve out this lure. I'm going to use this little block I just cut out to measure the actual density of this little piece of wood. First, I get the dimensions, and then by multiplying those dimensions together, I end up with the volume. 7.06 milliliters. And now by taking the weight of the little block of wood and dividing that by the actual volume, 7.06, you end up with 0.1, which is the density in grams per milliliter. Now it's time to start creating the lure out of this little block of balsa we made. Alright, now I want to cut the bib slot out while I still have some nice square surfaces to sort of reference. I took this little T-square angle finder thing and I measured as closely as I could the angle of the bib of the original lure. And it was 45 degrees exactly. So that's what we're going with. Alright, now I'm going to take this out to the belt sander, send it down to the lines. That should take all of 30 seconds, and then we'll get to shaping it in the other direction, from the top, the taper, front and back. Kept it pretty square, and the shape looks pretty much like the other one. Now we need to shape it in the other direction. Alright, so first, before I can put those contours in, I need to measure back to where the widest point needs to be. And now I'm just going to put a couple of marks where the widest point should be, which I measured the widest point to be 17.7. Then I can put like a nice natural taper in it. And I'll just use a French curve to lay in the taper. There you go, hopefully you can see that. Let's go cut it down. Alright, so now comes the hard part. Getting this to look like this. And that's going to mean some very patient shaping. I'll probably not take any off with a knife. Well, I might, just to speed things up a little bit. Alright, I've worked it down, so it's starting to look a little bit like the lure. At this point, it's time to go back out to the sander, and I probably won't bore you with a bunch of sanding. I'll come back to you when I get it really close and ready for hand sanding. Well, that's pretty close. Pretty happy with that shape. The next step is to seal this thing with just a thin coat of UV resin. So the biggest reason that I wouldn't go directly to making a mold of this is the bib. Because the bib isn't like a really common shape and size, I really can't reproduce it easily. And so I don't want to create a mold where I can't find a bib to fit the mold. You can see it's a little thicker. It even has like a little reinforcing plate on the back. So what I'm going to do is take an existing bib, that one, and I've already traced out the shape of that original bib, and so I'm going to slowly shape this little Lexan to conform with that little trace line, and hopefully that'll work. Alright, this is sort of fiddly business, so I'm going to take my time, and I'll probably do the very final bit of shaping with a little sanding board by hand. Alright, check this out. That's pretty close to the shape. I just got a little bit of touching up to do. But the next thing we really need to do is get that thin coat of resin clear on there to protect that soft balsa. But I can't do that until I know what the volume is, because I really want to be close to the volume of the original lure. And we know that the density of the balsa is 0.1 grams per milliliter. So that means this thing's got to weigh about 3.5 grams to be the same volume as the original one. So 3.6, that's pretty doggone close. All right, let's see how this thing's doing. It sealed it, gave it a little bit of protection, and raised the grain a little bit. All right, so the next thing is to make a wire harness that fits in here. After that's installed, we'll know how much weight to put in. Now I'm gonna have to cut a slot right down the middle of this on top. All right, I think that's pretty good. So I'm only able to make the eye with this machine. I can't actually twist it, so I'm twisting it by hand and getting just a couple of wraps on it. That's all you really need. And let's see how this thing fits on the lure. And that's how the nose will look. So now it's just a matter of defining where I want the belly eyes. And I'll just mark the one I'm leaving where it's going to go, and then this one is going to come up about 3/4 of an inch. So this is kind of like the drop down technique. A lot of folks will put them in from the bottom, and actually with balsa most people like to do the lure in 2 halves and then embed it in the middle. For me it's just a little less fiddly to do it this way. And I'm just drilling right to the bottom of my slot. And making these bends and eyeballing where to put them takes a little bit of practice. And I can just do a quick test fit here. Almost perfect. Drive that in there a little bit. And now it's just a matter of wrapping it back over and doing the other one, which I believe right there is going to be good. And I'll just give it a little kink so I don't lose it. Now I just dry fit this thing for this last eye twist. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and make an eye and make a twist. And the next thing we do is glue this thing into the body with some 2-part resin. So before I actually weigh the lure and figure out the actual internal weights I need to put in it, I want to glue in the wire into the slot. And what I do is I take some 2-part epoxy, and this stuff is very quick setting, and I'll squeeze it into a little mini Ziploc bag, and I'm going to need quite a bit on this one, so squeeze everything to the bottom and just knead it. Then I'll just cut a tiny bit of the corner off, try to get some of the air out, and we just use it to pipe it right into the slot. Alright, it might need a little more to top it off, but we'll get that in a minute. Alright, this stuff has set up, and I haven't sanded it yet, but that's alright. This is the last of the critical elements or measurements. Actually, we're going to have to weigh this, and it comes to 7.96 grams. We also have to have the hooks we know we're going to use and the bib we're going to put in it. That gives us 15.01, 15 grams, and we know we need to be 22.9, or let's just call it 23 grams to be the same weight as the original one. We'll just drop some little lead split shot. 21.62 with those 2 split shots, but that's okay with me. I'm going to leave it like that because I know I've got to put foil on it, and the foil is going to be about 1.5 grams. It should make up the difference. There's one, and there's number 2. And I'll just fill these holes with the old baking soda and crazy glue trick. Man, I hate those crazy glue fumes, man. They're awful. Okay, it's the next day, and I'm taking some time out from cleaning my gutters. All right, since last time, what I did was sand down all that resin fill in the slot and for the weights, and then I put a pretty heavy coat of UV resin, and came out pretty nice. So now I just want to put foil on it, and I want it to resemble the foil on the old one. And you can see it has some little tiny dimples resembling, I guess, small scales. And I'm going to be using just this self-adhering HVAC tape. I've already cut a piece long enough to fold in half and be as long as the lure itself. So usually I'll trace out a shape just a bit bigger than the lure itself. All right, got a right and we got a left. All right, now I'm going to use my little knurling tool here to add that texture, and I'm just going to follow the top of the lure, and it's not going to be fully textured, just sort of, it'll create sort of a lateral line at the very bottom. So it'll be kind of partially textured. And I'm going to try to align this so the bottom of those knurling kind of align with the lip slot. And all these ugly wrinkles should be able to be taken out just by rubbing it out with something round and smooth. Alright, I'll do the other one and then I'll cut the slot. Alright, I've cleared the slot and everything's burnished in as good as I'm going to get it. But before we move on to painting, I'm going to put another clear coat on here, and that'll cover up the little seams and make the paint a little smoother. Alright, that'll take 30 or 40 minutes and then we'll get back to painting. Alright, I'm glad this is a long weekend. This is taking me forever. Alright, this is looking pretty good. I've just got to give it a little light sanding to knock the sheen off so the paint sticks well, and then we'll start the paint job. Alright, we're going to go with the same simple paint job that the original one has. So white on the bottom, black on top, and a little bit of red. Start off with opaque white. This is a Testors Aztec opaque white. Okay, so we're gonna switch to black. Still sticking with Testors paints. All right, so I'm not a big fan of these sort of baggly, googly eyes things. They just seem a little toy-like to me, so I'm gonna go with just some standard 3D eyes. I will do a little bit of a halo here just to make the eyes look a little bigger. All right, and to create this orangey red, I'm just gonna use some Wicked paints. This is the Createx Wicked Pearl Red, and then I'll give it a little bit of a shot with some transparent orange. Let's see if we can soften that red a little bit. Yeah, that did the job. Looks pretty close. Now we need to put eyes on it. I went with these eyes that have sort of an offset pupil, so it kind of looks like it's looking back and is a little frightened. And now I'm just putting in a coat of the polyacrylic mid coat to seal the paint, and we should be ready to go in about a half hour, ready to do a clear coat. The nice thing about setting the Lexan is that the Lexan actually carries the UV light back down into it, so it'll actually set everything that's down inside. All right, this is always the part of the project that always makes me a little nervous. Sometimes I'll completely ruin it at the very end with a bad clear coat. Pretty happy with that. Everything looks nice, and even a couple little blemishes, but honestly I have lost my touch with balsa, because you got to handle balsa so lightly, the slightest little pinch and you end up with a little divot. So pretty happy with the way it came out, considering. So the next step is to get down to the lake and get some underwater shots, have this and the original lure in a side-by-side comparison, and see how well we were able to mimic the old lure. All right, here's the original. All right, now here's the new one. And you can see it floats pretty much level, maybe slightly head down. So it's got a nice wobble and plenty of roll. Okay, here's the original one. And you can see that it has a lot of roll and just sort of a subtle head shake. You can really see the roll in slow motion. Not a whole lot of head shake. But that is a pretty nice action. Okay, this is the new one, the one I made. And you can see it's definitely a bulkier lure. It's got a lot of roll and a bit more head shake. You can really see it in this shot. And the reason for that we'll cover on the next masterclass. But you gotta admit, it has a pretty enticing action too. I dropped the GoPro. I'll see you guys on the next video.